The bar was thick with cigarette smoke and the sound of clinking beer bottles when Marcus Chen walked through the door. After 18 months deployed in Afghanistan, the Navy SEAL was finally home in San Diego, trying to adjust to civilian life during his brief leave. He wore simple jeans and a plain black t-shirt, nothing that would draw attention to his military background. Marcus had chosen this particular bar because it was far from the base, somewhere he could blend in with regular people and maybe forget about the weight of his last mission for a few hours. The memory of losing 2 teammates in an IED explosion still haunted his sleep, and tonight he just wanted to drink a quiet beer and watch the baseball game on the television above the bar. The establishment was typical for the neighborhood, working-class locals, a few college students, and the usual mix of people trying to unwind after long days. Marcus found a spot at the far end of the bar, ordered a Corona, and settled in to watch the Padres game. The bartender, a friendly woman in her 40s named Sarah, struck up casual conversation about the game, but Marcus kept his responses brief and polite. About an hour into his quiet evening, trouble walked through the door in the form of 3 men in their late 20s. They were clearly already drunk, loud and aggressive, looking for entertainment at someone else's expense. The leader of the group was a stocky man with bleached hair and multiple tattoos covering his arms. His 2 friends flanked him like loyal dogs, feeding off his energy and looking for approval. Marcus noticed them immediately. His military training had taught him to assess potential threats the moment they entered his environment. Something about their body language and the way they scanned the room told him they were looking for trouble. He turned back to his beer, hoping they would find a different target for their entertainment. The 3 men ordered shots and beers, growing progressively louder with each drink. They began making crude comments about other patrons, laughing at their own jokes, and generally making the atmosphere uncomfortable for everyone around them. Marcus watched in the mirror behind the bar as several customers quietly finished their drinks and left. Sarah the bartender tried to manage the situation diplomatically, suggesting they keep it down a bit, but the men just laughed at her. The leader, who called himself Tank, made an inappropriate comment about her appearance that made her visibly uncomfortable. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he forced himself to stay calm and mind his own business. The situation escalated when the 3 men noticed an elderly veteran sitting alone in a corner booth. The old man wore a Vietnam War veteran cap and was quietly eating dinner while reading a newspaper. Tank pointed him out to his friends and began making loud, mocking comments about old soldiers and how they probably made up their war stories. Marcus gripped his beer bottle tighter, his knuckles going white. He had deep respect for all veterans, especially those who had served in Vietnam and faced hostile homecomings. The old man was clearly trying to ignore the harassment, but Tank and his friends were emboldened by the lack of response. They moved closer to the veteran's table, surrounding it while continuing their verbal assault. Tank knocked the man's newspaper to the floor and demanded to know if he had really killed anyone or if he was just playing dress-up. The elderly veteran looked up with dignity and quietly asked them to leave him alone. This only seemed to encourage Tank further. He grabbed the veteran's cap from his head and tossed it to one of his friends, who caught it and held it high above his head like a trophy. The old man stood up slowly, his hands shaking slightly, and asked for his cap back. Tank shoved him back into the booth, telling him to sit down, old man. Marcus had seen enough. Every fiber of his being told him to intervene, but his training also warned him about escalating situations unnecessarily. He was acutely aware that his skills could seriously hurt someone if he wasn't careful. He caught Sarah's eye and saw the fear there. She had already called the police, but they were at least 10 minutes away. Making his decision, Marcus stood up and walked over to the table. His movements were calm and controlled, showing no aggression or threat. He approached Tank with his hands visible and spoke in a level voice. "Hey, guys, how about we just give the man his hat back and let him finish his dinner in peace?" Tank turned to face Marcus, sizing him up with the confidence of someone who had never faced real opposition. Marcus was average height and build, certainly not imposing in any obvious way. Tank saw an easy target and grinned maliciously. "Why don't you mind your own business, pretty boy? This doesn't concern you." Marcus maintained his calm demeanor and tried once more. "I'm just asking you to show some respect to a veteran. Give him his cap back, and we can all go back to having a good evening." Tank's friends had moved to flank Marcus, sensing their leader was about to assert his dominance. The bar had gone quiet, with all the remaining patrons watching the confrontation unfold. The elderly veteran remained seated, looking both grateful and worried about what Marcus might be getting himself into. Tank stepped closer to Marcus, close enough that he could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You want to play hero for Grandpa here? How about you buy us a round of drinks and maybe we'll think about giving him his hat back." Marcus could feel the familiar calm settling over him, the same mental state that had kept him alive through countless dangerous situations overseas. His breathing slowed, his awareness heightened, and he began calculating distances and angles almost automatically. "Last chance," Marcus said quietly. "Just give the man his cap and walk away." Tank laughed loud and ugly, looking back at his friends to make sure they were watching. "Or what, tough guy? You gonna make me?" Without warning, Tank threw a wild haymaker punch aimed directly at Marcus's face. It was the kind of telegraphed, clumsy attack that might work in a bar fight against an ordinary civilian, but Marcus was far from ordinary. What happened next would be talked about in that bar for years to come. Marcus Chen's years of intensive combat training kicked in with devastating precision. Tank's clumsy punch moved through the air in what seemed like slow motion to the Navy SEAL. Marcus had faced trained enemy fighters in life-or-death situations. This drunk amateur might as well have been moving underwater. Without even thinking, Marcus stepped slightly to his left, letting Tank's fist sail harmlessly past his head. In the same fluid motion, he grabbed Tank's extended wrist with his right hand and Tank's elbow with his left. Using Tank's own forward momentum against him, Marcus executed a perfect arm drag, redirecting all of Tank's energy and sending him stumbling past. Tank crashed face-first into the wall behind Marcus with a sickening thud, his nose connecting solidly with the wooden paneling. Blood immediately began flowing from his nostrils as he bounced off the wall and staggered backward, completely disoriented. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. Tank's two friends stood frozen in shock for a moment, their brains struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Their supposedly tough leader was now leaning against the wall, blood streaming down his face, looking like he had just run into a brick wall at full speed. The first friend, a tall skinny man with a scraggly beard, recovered from his surprise and rushed at Marcus from the left side. He threw a wild overhand right that had no technique behind it, just anger and desperation. Marcus didn't even need to move his feet, he simply leaned back, letting the punch miss by inches, then stepped forward and delivered a precise palm strike to the man's solar plexus. The impact drove all the air from the attacker's lungs in an explosive whoosh. He doubled over immediately, gasping like a fish out of water, completely unable to breathe. Marcus gently guided him to the floor where he curled up in a fetal position, focusing entirely on trying to get air back into his lungs. The second friend, shorter but stockier than the first, had watched both of his companions get neutralized with embarrassing ease. Something about Marcus's calm, controlled movements finally registered in his alcohol-clouded brain. This wasn't some random bar patron, this was someone with serious training. But pride and liquid courage made him commit to the fight anyway. He pulled a small pocket knife from his jeans, thinking the weapon would give him the advantage he needed. The blade was only about 3 inches long, more of a utility tool than a weapon, but it was sharp enough to do damage. Marcus saw the knife immediately and his training shifted to a higher level of threat assessment. He could no longer afford to simply neutralize, a blade made this potentially lethal for both of them. The calm that had settled over him deepened further, and time seemed to slow down even more. The man with the knife tried to be smart about it, feinting with his left hand before bringing the blade up in a quick thrust toward Marcus's ribs. It was actually a reasonably clever attack for an untrained fighter, but Marcus had been taught to defend against military combat knives wielded by experts. Marcus trapped the knife hand by grabbing the man's wrist with both hands, then twisted sharply while stepping into his opponent's space. The knife wielder's arm was forced up and back in an unnatural position, and the pain was immediate and intense. His fingers opened reflexively, and the knife clattered harmlessly to the floor. Without releasing the trapped wrist, Marcus swept the man's feet out from under him and guided him down to the floor face first. He maintained control of the wrist while placing his knee between the man's shoulder blades, effectively pinning him in place. The entire knife disarmament had taken maybe 4 seconds. Tank had finally managed to stop the bleeding from his nose and was attempting to rejoin the fight. His vision was blurred from the impact with the wall, and he was seeing double, but his ego demanded that he try to salvage some dignity from the situation. He picked up a beer bottle from a nearby table, smashed it against the edge, and now held a jagged weapon. Marcus assessed this new threat while maintaining his pin on the knife wielder. A broken bottle was actually more dangerous than the small knife had been. The irregular edges could cause severe lacerations, and Tank's desperation made him unpredictable. Sarah the bartender was shouting into the phone, giving a frantic update to the 911 dispatcher about weapons being involved. The elderly veteran had moved to a safer position behind the bar, and the few remaining patrons had pressed themselves against the far wall, recording everything on their smartphones. Tank advanced with the broken bottle held out in front of him, weaving slightly from his earlier collision with the wall. "I'm gonna cut you up, pretty boy. You think you're tough? Let's see how tough you are, bleeding all over the floor." Marcus released the pinned man and stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving the improvised weapon in Tank's hand. The man he had been holding immediately curled into a ball, cradling his injured wrist and making no attempt to continue fighting. "Put the bottle down," Marcus said in the same calm voice he had used throughout the confrontation. "You're already in enough trouble. Don't make this worse for yourself." Tank laughed wildly, blood still trickling from his nose. "Worse for me? You're the one about to get carved up." He lunged forward with the broken bottle, aiming for Marcus's throat. Marcus stepped to the side and grabbed Tank's wrist with his left hand while simultaneously striking Tank's elbow joint with his right palm. The blow hyperextended Tank's arm, causing excruciating pain and forcing his grip to open. The broken bottle fell to the floor and shattered into smaller pieces. But Marcus wasn't finished. In one continuous motion, he spun Tank around and applied a rear naked choke, cutting off the blood flow to Tank's brain. It was the same technique he had used numerous times in the field to silently neutralize sentries. Tank struggled frantically for about 15 seconds, clawing at Marcus's arm and trying to break free. But the choke was applied with perfect technique, and Tank's movements grew weaker and weaker until he finally went limp. Marcus immediately released the hold and lowered Tank gently to the floor. The man was unconscious but breathing normally. He would wake up in a few minutes with nothing more than a headache to add to his broken nose. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 2 minutes. 3 aggressive men who had started the evening looking for easy victims now lay on the floor in various states of defeat. One was unconscious, one couldn't breathe properly, and one was cradling an injured wrist while trying to figure out what had just happened to him. Marcus stood in the center of the carnage, not even breathing hard. His clothes were barely wrinkled, and he didn't have a scratch on him. The contrast between his calm appearance and the destruction around him was almost surreal. The sound of sirens could be heard in the distance, growing louder as they approached. Sarah emerged from behind the bar with a clean bar towel, which she offered to Marcus for his hands, though he didn't actually need it. "The police will be here any minute," she said, her voice shaking slightly from the adrenaline. "Are you okay? Are you hurt at all?" Marcus shook his head. "I'm fine. Is everyone else okay?" The elderly veteran approached slowly, his recovered cap firmly on his head. He looked at Marcus with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. "Son, I don't know what kind of training you have, but thank you. Those boys were getting pretty ugly, and I'm too old to defend myself like I used to." "It was the right thing to do, sir," Marcus replied simply. "No veteran should have to put up with that kind of disrespect." As the sirens grew louder, Marcus began to mentally prepare for the questions that would inevitably come. He hoped the police would be understanding about the situation, but he knew that 3 injured men and a bar full of witnesses would require some careful explanation. What he didn't expect was how the cell phone videos of the incident would change everything. The first police officers through the door were San Diego PD veterans who had seen their share of bar fights, but the scene that greeted them was unlike anything in their experience. 3 men lay groaning on the floor in various states of injury, while a calm, uninjured man in civilian clothes stood nearby, hands visible and non-threatening. Officer Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran, immediately began assessing the situation. His partner, Officer Kim, called for paramedics while starting to take witness statements. The contrast between the devastation and Marcus's composed demeanor was so striking that both officers initially suspected he might have used weapons. "I'm going to need you to step over here and put your hands behind your back," Officer Rodriguez said, approaching Marcus cautiously. "We need to sort out what happened here." Marcus complied immediately, understanding the officer's position. "I'm active duty military, sir. My ID is in my right rear pocket. This was self-defense after they attacked an elderly veteran." Sarah the bartender quickly intervened, her voice still shaky but determined. "Officer, that man saved everyone in here. These three came in drunk and aggressive, harassing customers. When they started bullying that elderly gentleman over there, this man tried to talk them down peacefully. They attacked him first." The elderly veteran, Harold Morrison, stepped forward with his Vietnam War cap still firmly in place. "Officer, I'm Harold Morrison, served 3 tours in Vietnam. These troublemakers were harassing me, knocked my cap off, pushed me around. This young man tried to handle it diplomatically, but they threw the first punch." Officer Kim was taking notes rapidly while more backup units arrived. The paramedics began treating Tank's broken nose and checking the other 2 for injuries. All 3 attackers were conscious now but still too dazed and in too much pain to give coherent statements. "Did anyone record what happened?" Officer Rodriguez asked the assembled witnesses. Multiple hands went up around the room. At least 6 different people had captured parts of the incident on their smartphones. Officer Kim began collecting the devices to review the footage, a process that would prove crucial to understanding the true sequence of events. The first video they watched showed Tank throwing the initial punch and Marcus's defensive response. The footage clearly demonstrated that Marcus had used minimal force necessary to defend himself, redirecting Tank's momentum rather than throwing a devastating counterattack. The second video captured the knife incident in detail, showing how Marcus had controlled and disarmed the attacker without causing permanent injury. Even the officers, who had extensive defensive tactics training, were impressed by the precision and restraint Marcus had shown. The third video was the most dramatic, showing Tank's broken bottle attack and Marcus's response. What struck the officers was how Marcus had immediately released his chokehold once Tank was unconscious, then gently lowered him to the floor and checked his breathing. "What's your military background?" Officer Rodriguez asked Marcus, his tone shifting from suspicious to respectful. "Navy SEAL, sir. I'm currently on leave between deployments. My command contact information is in my wallet if you need to verify." The pieces began falling into place for the officers. Marcus's calm demeanor, precise defensive techniques, and obvious training explained the seemingly impossible outcome of a 1-against-3 fight. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the emergency room physician who treated the 3 attackers, later described their injuries to investigators. Tank had a broken nose but no concussion despite his collision with the wall. The second attacker had no lasting damage from the solar plexus strike, just temporary difficulty breathing. The third man had a strained wrist but no broken bones despite the dramatic knife disarmament. "What impressed me most," Dr. Walsh told the police, "was the precision of these injuries. Someone with this level of training could have inflicted much more serious damage if they had wanted to. These men are lucky they picked a fight with someone who showed remarkable restraint." Meanwhile, the smartphone videos were already making their way onto social media. The first video, posted by a college student who had been sitting near the bar, was shared hundreds of times within the first hour. The caption read, "Navy SEAL quietly defends elderly Vietnam vet from drunk bullies. This is what real heroes look like." Marcus was unaware of his growing internet fame as he spent the next several hours at the police station, providing a detailed statement about the incident. His commanding officer, Commander Sarah Mitchell, arrived to provide support and verify his military status. "Chen is one of our most decorated operators," Commander Mitchell told the investigating detectives. "He's completed multiple combat deployments and has commendations for his professionalism and restraint under pressure. What you witnessed tonight is exactly the kind of controlled response we train our people to demonstrate." The district attorney's office reviewed the case the following morning and declined to press any charges against Marcus. The evidence was overwhelming that he had acted in self-defense and in defense of others. Tank and his two friends, however, faced charges including assault, disorderly conduct, and weapons violations for the knife and broken bottle. By the time Marcus was released from the police station, the videos of the incident had been viewed over 2 million times across various social media platforms. News outlets were picking up the story, and his phone was flooded with missed calls from reporters wanting interviews. The story resonated with people for several reasons. In an era of increasing division and conflict, Marcus's story represented old-fashioned values, respect for veterans, standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves, and using minimal necessary force even when provoked. Harold Morrison, the Vietnam veteran, spoke to local news that evening. "That young man didn't know me from Adam, but when he saw bullies picking on an old soldier, he stepped up. He tried to handle it peacefully first, and when they forced him to fight, he protected himself and everyone else in that bar. That's the kind of character we need more of in this world." Tank, whose real name was revealed to be Bradley Walsh, faced a very different kind of attention. His aggressive behavior and the dramatic way he was defeated made him an object of ridicule online. Memes featuring his broken nose mugshot spread across social media with captions about picking fights with trained warriors. The story also sparked broader conversations about veteran issues and respect for military service. Harold Morrison's dignified response to the harassment highlighted the ongoing challenges many veterans face when trying to simply exist in public spaces without being bothered or having their service questioned. Marcus, uncomfortable with the attention, initially tried to avoid media interviews. But, when he realized the story was highlighting important issues about veteran respect and appropriate use of force, he agreed to speak with a few carefully chosen outlets. "I didn't do anything special," he told one reporter. "I saw someone being disrespected and I tried to handle it the right way. When they forced the situation to become physical, I used my training to protect myself and others. Any decent person would have done the same thing." But the video evidence suggested otherwise. Marcus's combination of tactical skill, split-second decision-making, and remarkable restraint was anything but ordinary. Combat sports experts who analyzed the footage were amazed by the precision of his defensive techniques. "What you're seeing here is years of intensive training being applied with perfect control," explained Jake Martinez, a former Marine Corps combat instructor who reviewed the videos. "He neutralized 3 attackers using minimal force, never escalating beyond what was absolutely necessary. This is textbook self-defense from someone who really knows what they're doing." The incident also had unexpected consequences for the bar where it occurred. Sarah's Pub, which had been struggling financially, suddenly found itself famous. People came from all over San Diego to see where the Seal Bar fight had taken place, and business boomed for months afterward. Sarah herself became something of a local celebrity, giving interviews about what she witnessed that night. "I've seen plenty of fights in my 20 years running this place," she said, "but I've never seen anything like what Marcus did. He was like watching a master craftsman at work, everything precise, controlled, professional." As the story continued to spread, it caught the attention of people far beyond San Diego. 3 weeks after the incident at Sarah's Pub, Marcus Chen found himself in an unexpected position. The viral videos had been viewed over 50 million times across all platforms, and his story had been featured on major news networks, military publications, and social media channels around the world. What surprised everyone, including Marcus himself, was how the story continued to grow and evolve beyond the initial incident. The video had become a symbol of various social movements, from veteran advocacy groups to discussions about appropriate responses to bullying and harassment. Harold Morrison, the Vietnam veteran Marcus had defended, became an unlikely internet celebrity himself. His dignified interviews and eloquent discussions about respect for military service struck a chord with viewers across the political spectrum. At 72 years old, he suddenly found himself with a significant social media following and invitations to speak at veteran events. "That night changed my perspective on young people today," Harold told a gathering of veterans in Chicago. "I thought maybe the current generation didn't understand respect and honor. But Marcus Chen showed me that the same values that drove us to serve are alive and well in today's military. That gives me hope for the future." The three attackers faced different fates based on their responses to the incident. Tank, whose real name was Bradley Walsh, initially tried to capitalize on his notoriety by claiming he had been the real victim. He attempted to sell his story to tabloids, claiming that Marcus had used excessive force and that the videos didn't tell the full story. This strategy backfired spectacularly when additional footage emerged showing Tank's behavior before the fight began. Security cameras from outside the bar captured him and his friends drinking in the parking lot while making crude comments about teaching some lessons to people inside. These videos painted a picture of premeditated troublemaking that destroyed any sympathy he might have garnered. Tank's two friends took different approaches. The man Marcus had disarmed apologized publicly and entered an alcohol treatment program. He gave interviews expressing remorse for his actions and praising Marcus for showing restraint that likely prevented serious injury. The second friend largely disappeared from public view, serving his community service sentence quietly and avoiding media attention. Legal experts noted that all three men had received relatively light sentences, partly because Marcus's restraint had prevented more serious charges from being filed. Commander Sarah Mitchell received numerous requests for interviews about Marcus and the training methods that produced such precise responses under pressure. She used these opportunities to highlight the professionalism and dedication of Navy SEALs while emphasizing that Marcus's actions represented the values the service tried to instill in all its members. "We don't train our people to be fighters," she explained to a military news outlet. "We train them to be protectors. The goal is always to accomplish the mission with minimal force and maximum precision." What Marcus demonstrated that night is exactly what we hope to see from our operators in any situation. The incident also sparked discussions in law enforcement circles about de-escalation techniques and appropriate use of force. Police departments around the country began using the footage as a training tool, highlighting how Marcus had attempted verbal de-escalation first and used only the minimum force necessary to neutralize each threat. Detective Lisa Wong, who had worked the case, became a frequent speaker at law enforcement conferences. "What impressed me most about reviewing this incident was Chen's decision-making process. Every action was measured and controlled. He escalated his response only when forced to do so, and he immediately de-escalated when the threat was neutralized." Marcus initially struggled with the attention and fame that came from the incident. As someone trained to operate in the shadows, being thrust into the spotlight was uncomfortable and often overwhelming. He received thousands of interview requests, movie offers, and invitations to appear on talk shows. After consulting with his command and carefully considering his options, Marcus decided to use his platform to advocate for veteran issues and promote understanding between military and civilian communities. He began accepting selected speaking engagements, focusing on organizations that served veterans or promoted community service. His first major public appearance was at a fundraiser for homeless veterans, where he shared the stage with Harold Morrison. The two men had developed an unlikely friendship in the weeks following the incident, with Harold serving as an informal mentor and Marcus providing support for Harold's own newfound advocacy work. "Marcus taught me that standing up for what's right doesn't require violence or aggression," Harold told the audience. "Sometimes it just requires the courage to speak up and the skills to back up your words when someone forces the issue." The bar where the incident occurred, Sarah's Pub, became an unexpected pilgrimage site for military personnel and supporters. Sarah decided to dedicate a corner of the establishment to honoring veterans, displaying photos and memorabilia donated by customers who had served in various conflicts. She also instituted a policy of free meals for veterans on Veterans Day and Memorial Day, funded partly by the increased business generated by the incident's fame. The Marcus Chen Corner became a quiet space where veterans could gather and share stories without being bothered by tourists or gawkers. The incident had lasting effects on the local community as well. Several other businesses in the neighborhood began implementing policies to better support veterans and address harassment issues more proactively. The San Diego Police Department noted a significant decrease in similar incidents in the months following the viral video, suggesting that potential troublemakers were reconsidering their behavior. Marcus returned to active duty 6 months after the incident, deploying overseas for another mission that he couldn't discuss publicly. Before leaving, he participated in a documentary about veteran integration and community support, using his experience to highlight both the challenges and opportunities facing returning service members. The documentary, which featured interviews with Harold, Sarah, and several other witnesses to the original incident, won several awards and was used by veteran organizations around the country to promote understanding and support for military families. During his deployment, Marcus received hundreds of letters from people who had been inspired by his story. Many were from young people considering military service, others from veterans who felt renewed pride in their service, and still others from civilians who had been inspired to stand up against bullying or harassment in their own communities. One letter particularly moved him. It came from a high school student in Ohio who had used Marcus's example to intervene when he witnessed bullying at his school. The student had successfully de-escalated a situation using verbal techniques similar to what Marcus had attempted at the bar, preventing what could have been a serious physical confrontation. "Your story showed me that being strong doesn't mean being aggressive," the student wrote. "It means being brave enough to do the right thing and skilled enough to handle whatever happens next." When Marcus returned from his deployment 8 months later, he found that his story had evolved into something larger than the original incident. It had become part of ongoing conversations about civic responsibility, veteran support, and the appropriate use of skills and training in civilian situations. He was invited to speak at his old high school, where he told students that the most important lesson from his experience wasn't about fighting techniques or military training. "The real lesson," he said, "is that we all have a responsibility to protect those who can't protect themselves. Sometimes that means speaking up, sometimes it means stepping in, and sometimes it means knowing when to walk away." Harold Morrison, now a regular speaker at veteran events across the country, often concluded his presentations with a reflection on that night at Sarah's pub. "I went into that bar just wanting to eat dinner and read my paper in peace. I had no idea I was about to witness something that would restore my faith in the next generation of Americans." The video of Marcus's defensive actions continued to be studied and analyzed by martial arts experts, military trainers, and law enforcement professionals. It became a textbook example of how proper training, combined with good judgment and moral character, could transform a potentially tragic situation into a positive outcome for everyone involved. Marcus Chan returned to his regular duties, serving his country with the same quiet professionalism that had characterized his actions that night in the bar. But his story continued to inspire people around the world, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon is restraint, and the greatest strength lies in protecting those who need protection most. Years later, when people asked Marcus about that night, he would always redirect the conversation back to Harold Morrison and the broader issues of veteran support and community responsibility. "I was just doing what anyone should do," he would say. The real heroes are people like Harold, who served their country and continue to contribute to their communities with dignity and grace. The incident at Sarah's pub had lasted less than 2 minutes, but its impact would continue for years, touching lives and inspiring actions far beyond what anyone could have imagined that night when 3 bullies thought a punch would work against a quiet man who turned out to be anything but ordinary.